Hey, Patrick's got first blood this morning. All right, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. So I'll let this go for a few seconds. Make sure we get that thumbnail in there for the algorithmics. And hello. All right. It is Monday morning. And I'm going to try to do a mellow Monday show. It may not be as mellow as I would have preferred, but, we're going to talk about the dire wolves. Now, I know, it's not. It's a little break from politics, or at least it seems to be on the face of it. I tell you what, this morning I was reading a bunch of articles, and I've got it pulled up. It'll probably be tomorrow's show. I was gonna do something about the collapse of Black Girl Magic with, Fannie Willis getting boo-fooed in court and Jasmine Crockett under investigation with Act Blue corruption. And I thought, no, you know what? I wanted to do the Mellow Monday shows, and let's we can be a little more mellow on the feel good story of the weekend. At least to start, because there are some questions that are worth asking and answering, and at least thinking about where it relates to this. So, just in the past few days, we've had the announcement that the dire wolf has been de-extincted by a company called Colossal Bioengineering or Biogenetics. Bioengineering is what they do. I think it's Biogenetics. But let's take a peek at this. So, what is a dire wolf? How the formerly extinct species compares to gray wolves. And for the first time in over 10,000 years, the howl of a dire wolf is echoing once more. This time, from within a secretive nature preserve in the United States, the predator, long thought extinct and famously mythologized in pop culture like Game of Thrones, is back thanks to genetic engineering. Colossal Biosciences has successfully birthed 3 direwolf pups, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, through its de-extinction initiative. Okay, so first off, it says famously mythologized in pop culture like Game of Thrones. Y'all, Game of Thrones is less than 20 years old. Those of us who are proper nerds have been talking about dire wolves. I'd say since the 50s and 60s. I mean, I've only known about dire wolves since sometime in the 80s because I'm just not that old yet. But dire wolves were definitely a part of the original Dungeons and Dragons canon. Having a pet dire wolf playing as a druid or a ranger, certain kinds of elves, definitely part of that tabletop role-playing game, tabletop world. Of course, there were dire wolf, lycanthropic dire wolf equivalents in the Masquerade series and the Rage and I almost said White Claw, but all the Vampire the Masquerade and Rage the Apocalypse, all those kind of tabletop games, and throughout, there have been some version of a dire wolf being mutated into a warg for the purposes of orc mounts. I mean, the dire wolf has definitely been a part of pop culture and mythology and fantasy literature since long before the Game of Thrones books. But that as it may, what we're talking about here is the quote unquote de-extinction of the dire wolf. Now, this presents a lot of interesting fodder for the conversation. And let's be fair. The question of the quote from Jurassic Park, you spent so much time asking whether or not we could, we forgot to ask whether or not we should. And that's a damn good question, right? So without mincing too many words, let's just throw it out there. You're talking about genetic manipulation, right? So what we have now, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, these are not dire wolves. These are not this idea of de-extinction. I don't think it's possible. I think it is technically impossible. What you have instead is an entirely new species. They took gray wolves and they edited the gene code using CRISPR technology to make them seem like their ancestral dire wolf. In fact, it might be better. It might be more accurate to refer to this rather than de-extinction as de-evolution, right? Because I mean that's what an extinction event is. We should you should think of it as part of the Darwinian process. These beasts proved to not be fit for purpose. So these are gray wolves that have been genetically altered to have some of the characteristics of the extinct dire wolf, which they're the primary characteristics. They're somewhat larger, stronger bite force. Basically, it's a bigger, meaner wolf. But the idea of bringing these into the world, I'm almost always a fan of new technology and the exciting things that can come from it. We should, however, be incredibly skeptical of technology that is used to alter fundamental nature. And okay, on some level, all technology can be said to alter the fundamental nature of a thing. I mean, anything as simple as weaving cotton into socks. Okay, you've taken a natural thing and fundamentally altered the nature of it. Okay, cool. That's a fun argument, and not one entirely without merit, but there are certainly degrees of alteration. Alex Jones famously said they're turning the frogs gay, and he got a lot of flack for that. They're putting chemicals in the water to turn the frogs gay, and he got a lot of flack for that. But as it turned out, atrazine, water, and transgendered frogs. The frogs, spontaneously switching genders. This in this context is especially interesting because we have the cautionary tales, famously from Crichton's work with the Jurassic Park stories. It should be noted that the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were not purely the dinosaurs, in the strictest sense. It's not. They didn't just make a T-Rex or a Brontosaurus or a Triceratops. What they did, and this is in the science fiction, where Crichton had the freedom to make the claim, oh yeah, they just straight up found dinosaur DNA and grew dinosaurs. He absolutely had the freedom to do that within the context of science fiction. And instead, the story he told was, well, what they did is they took this DNA that they got from these amber fossilized mosquitoes, isolated the individual markers, and found, okay, here's the DNA for a velociraptor. Here's the DNA for a Mongoliensis. If anybody knows that word. Mungo, T-Rex, Brontosaurus, etc. And they spliced those with certain types of frogs. In particular, and they made a point to mention this in the books and in the film, the certain types of frogs which have a tendency to spontaneously swap genders. This, and of course, that ended up being a very important plot point. And there is such a thing as a frog which will spontaneously change gender when there is an insufficient number of male frogs in the local biosphere to propagate the species, right? And so, of course, in Jurassic Park, the plan had been that through the functions of the genetic manipulation, all of the dinosaurs would be female. in order to prevent them from reproducing naturally, because the whole plan was to have them in the theme park and for it to be a very controlled population. And of course, we've seen the film, we've read the book. That's not what happened. And it's not what happened precisely because they did not create dinosaurs. They altered the frogs to resemble dinosaurs. Now, they altered the frogs to resemble the dinosaurs in a very substantial degree. But the new things could not intelligently and correctly be called dinosaurs. Maybe neo-dinosaurs would be more appropriate. Same thing with these direwolves. They're not actually direwolves. They may resemble the direwolf in some substantial way, but go to the chicken and the egg argument. The chicken and the egg argument is a famous and difficult question to answer at a very low level. But frankly, I think it's a simple answer. Because the chicken, the actual chicken, comes from the egg, and the egg necessarily must come from somewhere. The thing that comes out of the egg must be a chicken in order for there to be a chicken-egg scenario. That does not guarantee that the egg must have come from a chicken. It could have come from something that was just different enough to a chicken to still produce the egg, right? Now, let me back up just a little bit and substantiate that claim before I go forward with it a little further. There have been some experiments. The Chinese famously have conducted some experiments with hybridizing humans and chimpanzees, and because of the nature of the project, necessarily because humans are larger than chimpanzees, it is necessary for the hybridized humanzee, as they called them, to be I'm missing the surrogate. The surrogate that gestates the embryonic humanzee must be a human woman and not a female chimpanzee, because a human baby is so much larger that it cannot be gestated in the female chimpanzee. It has to be necessarily, and this is science. This is a thing that has been experimented with already. So the humanzee has to be grown in a human woman, in a surrogate womb. So that means that in order to create that hybridization, you start with a male chimpanzee and a female human egg, and you've got the fertilization, implantation, gestation, and that is a series of experiments that they have gone forward with. Given that, right, understanding the science there, and that what you have is a purely human woman giving birth to the hybridized creature, the humanzee, the first humanzee, right? And then from there forward, once you've got enough humanzees that they can reproduce together, you've got humanzees birthing humanzees. But the first one is a human, right? Separated by a very narrow genetic margin from the coming offspring. The chicken and the egg becomes rather a simple prospect to solve. You have something that is necessarily a proto-chicken. It may resemble a chicken in many, many ways, but be just different enough to a modern chicken that you have the difference between a human and a chimpanzee, but in an avian format. So you've got a proto-chicken, chicken, egg, first chicken. The egg came first. Okay, so that said, in order to get to this dire wolf through genetic manipulation, you have the extinct dire wolf and the DNA taken from the teeth and skulls of 10,000-year-old semi-fossilized bones. Now you've got the genetically altered offspring coming from the evolved dire wolf. So all that about the proto chicken to the egg, You've got the dire wolf, goes extinct, but the offshoot species, you've got the wolves. And in this case, the gray wolves are being said to be the most closely related to the original dire wolf. And then you create something, a hybrid within the new gray wolf to generate what they're calling a dire wolf. Maybe we call it a neo dire wolf, right? Because it is necessarily a product of its immediate forebear. Even if that product has been altered to conform to some previous set of additional characteristics, then it's my opinion that you cannot de-extinct for exactly that reason. So what they've actually done is they've created a new species which very closely resembles an extinct species. Now, that by itself raises some very interesting questions about science and technology and the general ethics of this whole process. I already mentioned the Chinese doing the humanity experiments. Well, here's another one for you. China is testing biologically enhanced super soldiers on their own troops, says DNI Ratcliffe, right? So obviously Ratcliffe is not the DNI now. He's not the Director of National Intelligence today. That's Tulsi Gabbard. This story is from 2020, which should just be even more alarming because we're talking about a story that's 5 years old where top U.S. military intelligence is warning us that the Chinese are in fact using bioengineering, genetic manipulation and engineering to experiment with enhanced capabilities for quote unquote super soldiers. And yes, I said circa 2020. You heard that correctly. We're talking about the same time period that the Wuhan lab gave us the Wu flu, the Kung flu sicken, the COVID-19. So we do know that China, and Mario and I did a deep dive on China Saturday evening. It was, we went for almost 4 hours, which sounds like a very long video. And in fairness, it is a very long video, but several hundred people have now watched it was 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours, we went down the rabbit hole on Chinese history, 5,000 years of Chinese history, to explain how Buddhism and most especially Confucianism and the adherence to the concept of Hyodo, filial piety, has basically made this terrible enemy of the United States in China that is kind of has a cultural DNA of communism baked right into its entire history. Spent a lot of time on the mandate of heaven and who gained it and who lost it. These are the guys that, that's the Chinese. These are the guys that gave us the Wu flu. And, around the same period, we were getting intelligence reports that soldiers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, John Ratcliffe, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, said on Thursday that U.S. intelligence found China conducted human testing in the hope of developing soldiers with biologically enhanced capabilities. Right, but biologically enhanced capabilities. We're going to be doing a deep dive. I think it's the one that's on the ticket for this upcoming Saturday, where we'll be talking about MK Ultra, the men who stare at goats, and the efforts of the American and Russian militaries, and we'll probably find some China in there. Probably find some other usual suspects making an appearance in the MK Ultra saga. As world governments, I shit you not, this is not a conspiracy theory debunk. No. It's a thing that happened. Most of the world's superpowers attempted at some point to create psychic spies and psychic assassins, people who could use their brain power, the power of their mind, remote viewing, and all that crazy stuff to conduct military operations with what can only reasonably be called magic. This is a thing that happened. And those, so you talk about that kind of stuff going on, and in conjunction with what we're talking about here, as it turns out, the CIA is funding the woolly mammoth de-extinction company. It's being referred to as the woolly mammoth de-extinction company because they've said that's actually their primary goal. The dire wolves came first. And don't get me twisted. There's a big part of me that kind of wants to get some dire wolf pups and raise them up to be, the local security for my private property over here. Make no mistake, it would do my heart good to see dire wolves wandering around, highly trained, working dog level trained dire wolves, basically patrolling my perimeter. That would work for me. I'd be comfortable with that. I mean, I'm already contemplating purchasing one of those robot dogs with a minigun on its back just to keep the just to keep the goons at bay in case it happens. Sergeant Major mentions proton beam attack on U.S. Embassy in Cuba. Yeah. Legion says the CIA made a literal bomb that makes you gay. Yep, we're gonna be talking about that in one of the deep dives as well, I'm sure. So the CIA funding woolly mammoth de-extinction. Why is the CIA funding genetic research? Sergeant Major says robot dog is better. I might argue that with you, old man. On the face of it, I would say the robot dog does seem better because theoretically you have more control over it. But on the other side of that conversation, there's no AI hack backdoor for some government malcontent to take remote control of my genetically altered dire wolves. Like that, the absence of hackability is the advantage to go back to the genetic modification rather than the technological advancement. But why is the CIA funding de-extinction events? The argument is, well, China's already doing it, so we have to do it first. And I ain't gonna lie, I buy that argument hard. As much as I hate it, I love me some guns. And I will be a 2A absolutist until the day somebody puts a round in my ass. And successfully, I mean, I've been beat up and shot at and knife fights and all that good stuff. I mean, successfully puts me down. I will be a 2A absolutist until the day I die. And I do mean 2A absolutist. That said, I would happily live in a world that included no weapons. But here's the problem with that. There is no getting to a world that doesn't include weapons because the concept exists. Right? The concept exists. There was a British general that said the solution to the Muslim problem is that you have to eliminate every Muslim above the age at which they can have become literate, so that the idea no longer exists in the minds of any living creature, right? And that's the only way that you can solve the problem. I'm not advocating for that solution particularly on this show. My point is that like that concept that the British general, and I hate that I can't remember his name off the top of my head now, but just like that with any firearms, bladed weapons generally, there will never be a world in which there are no weapons because the concept has existed. So there's not a mechanism, there's not a legal mechanism, there's not a social movement, there's not a way that we can just get rid of weapons altogether. In fact, the more weapons you get rid of, the more likely it is that a bad actor will put his hands on weapons or create new weapons moving forward. So the argument that we need to do it first and better than China is actually a pretty compelling argument. And now to say that given all that, I trust the CIA to be the agency, the entity that is taking care of our best interests as American citizens in doing that work, that's a much longer stretch for my mind to get with. But I will say this, and I'll end on this. This will be the kind of mellow Monday note. I'm going to share with you from Colossal Laboratories. I'm going to share with you this is the website from Colossal Laboratories. So they say the mammoth, may prehistory thunder forward. We have the DNA, the technology, and the leading experts in the field. Next, we will have the woolly mammoth alive again. Okay. I watched a little bit of Glenn Beck talking about this. One of the arguments they make about bringing back the woolly mammoth, like here you go, Earth's old friend and new hero, and they argue, he's a vital defender of the Earth. We're gonna come back and watch this video in just a second. But 5 core goals for reviving the mammoth, and one is increased resilience of habitats to climate change and environmental upheaval. So I actually watched Glenn Beck talking about this earlier this morning, and he said, he asked the question, how the hell are the woolly mammoths going to improve the climate change problem? Because it's one of the claims they make, that the woolly mammoths will be good for climate change. And Glenn's like, how does that work? Do they eat cows and then not fart? I thought that was pretty funny. But so they've got this video here explaining the mammoth. The
vast mammoth steppe of the Pleistocene era. Woolly mammoths, now long extinct, once roamed these northern landscapes in large herds, playing a critical role in the stability of their ecosystem. In the last half-century, however, these permafrost regions have begun to thaw at an alarming rate due to climate change and the loss of this keystone species. Over the last decade, humanity has made significant advances in understanding DNA and the field of genetics. Breakthrough genetic engineering technologies like CRISPR and others have made it possible to read, edit, and even write genomes. Combining these modern genetic engineering technologies with ancient mammoth DNA recovered from frozen specimens allows for the de-extinction of the woolly mammoth genome. Reintroducing the woolly mammoth to their former homes in the Arctic regions will help to bring balance back to the habitat and slow or even reverse the damage that climate change has done to our planet. Colossal. Restoring the past for a better future.
Okay, that all sounds cute and everything. I gotta say, I got some questions. Uncle Steve says, dang, just listen to the narrator could make you get, yeah, his voice is atrazine. But, and this is what I'll close on. We've talked about the important difference between the sexes on this show many, many times before. And you could probably find me saying it 1,000 times live on air. It doesn't make sense to send the boobies out to hunt the mammoth. You keep the boobies in the cave to feed the babies while daddy goes to hunt the mammoth. Okay, I'll tell you this for sure. If they de-extinct the woolly mammoth, we will have mammoth ribs at a barbecue. I don't care I don't care if it means I have to go and poach the son of a bitch and drag him back myself, or run a frickin' crowdfunding campaign to purchase the carcass. If they de-extinct the woolly mammoth, the Brushfire Mind will be having Fred Flintstone style mammoth ribs and steaks at a barbecue. And that, if there is such a thing as a mammoth, this daddy is going to go and drag one back to the cave. And that would just make me happy. Just happy. So, Legion says the range of woolly mammoths would be very limited. They cannot survive in temperate zones. Correct. You would have to release them into the Russian tundra. And that is why they want to reanimate them. You know what? I'm comfortable with it. I may have to get after the AI and draw some Soviet troops on war mammoths invading China. Uncle Steve says sounds like a family project. Hell yeah. Grand Poobah meals. Yes. Hell yes. All right, guys, I got to get on down the road and go make some pictures. So I appreciate y'all watching this morning. I hope this was a good segment. Trying to do something a little more mellow than the usual hard hitting politics we like to cover on this show. If you guys get a chance, do go check out on Rumble the special episode we did on China, from Yellow Turbans to Zenny the Pooh. Why the Chinese bend toward communism. I think Mario did an absolutely outstanding job, as he always does, on that presentation. The several hundred people who have gone and watched, 3.5 hours of deep dive into the 5,000 years of history of China and the various skirmishes and battles and dynastic conflicts that have shaped that region. I'm just blowing up for me over how much I appreciate that stuff. Sergeant Major says, "What is mellow about dire wolves?" Sergeant Major, it's more mellow and fun and kind of goofy than the stories about the black girl apocalypse that we're going to cover tomorrow, with Fannie Willis and Keisha Lance Bottoms and Jasmine Crockett finally getting their comeuppance through the failures and collapses of lawfare and the like. So it could, I'm sure we could have come up with something more mellow, but this was mellower than what it might otherwise have been. So y'all be safe out there, guys. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.